Number 739. 739.
You got your Bibles this morning. Open up to the book of Matthew, chapter 3. Matthew, chapter 3. Robbie Richardson is a 6-year-old boy who lives in Boston. Wants to be a police officer when he grows up. About a month ago, Robbie and his dad, Michael, are riding around in the car. And Michael, his dad, comes up to a red light. It's going to turn right. And you know, you can turn right on red most of the time. Well, Robbie doesn't know that, but his dad does it, turns right on red, and Robbie, the young police officer that he is, he says, "Dad, if you do that again, I'm going to call the cops on you." And so they drive a little bit more, and old Michael pulls up to a red light. It's got to turn right again, and he turns right on red. And they get home. Robbie's upset about it, and his dad hears him. He goes into another room, and he calls 911. The little kid really goes into a room, and he calls 911, and his dad hears him say, "Yeah, my dad came to a red light, and he went past it." And so Michael gets on the phone, and he clears everything up, and it's ran in the Boston newspaper, and one of the reporters said that you got to be careful of what you're doing because you never know what your backseat driver can see. It's a pretty good message for us as parents and grandparents. It's a pretty good message for us, pretty good lesson for us on Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, by the way, to all the dads we have here today. You know, Mother's Day gets a lot of fanfare. Mother's Day, usually in sermons, we talk about how good Mom is. We talk about how valuable Mom is, and that's absolutely right. But on Father's Day, we usually talk about, dads, here's what you need to do better. We talk about, dads, here are some areas that you can improve yourself as a father. When you look at, outside of church, kind of in our culture, the same thing is true. We are more likely to buy a gift for Mother's Day. 83% of us buy a gift for our moms on Mother's Day, while only 73% buy a gift for dads on Father's Day. Those who do plan to get a gift are going to spend a little bit less on dad than mom. Moms, we spend about $85. Dads, we spend about $57. Dads, 46% of us, when asked, "What do you want for Father's Day?" 46% say, "I want some more time with my family." Today, we're going to spend some time celebrating those dads. Celebrating dads who are looking out for their families. We're celebrating dads today who do the right thing for their families. Dads who are good fathers to their children. And the way we're going to do that is look at the greatest father of all. And if you will, look in Matthew chapter 3. In John chapter 3, Jake read for us that this Father in heaven loves you and I so much that He sent His Son. That's the word He uses to describe Jesus. He sent His Son into the world that whoever believes in Him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Well, that everlasting life comes from the ministry and the life and the death of Jesus. That's how we learn about that everlasting life. That's how we come to know what we've got to do to have that everlasting life. And that ministry of the Son of God begins in Matthew chapter 3. Look with me here, Matthew 3, verse 13. "And so Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to John to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, 'I need to be baptized by you, and you come to me?' But Jesus answered him, 'Let it be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness.' And then he consented. Verse 16. "And when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, coming to rest on him. And behold, a voice from heaven, widely regarded as the voice of God Himself, said, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased.'" So in John chapter 3, we read about this Father who loves the world so much that He sends His Son to give His life for that world. In Matthew chapter 3, we read something about Jesus and His Father. In Matthew 3, we probably have the closest connection in the whole Bible between God the Father and God the Son, Jesus. The closest interaction we've got between the Father and the Son, God and Jesus. And we see some powerful connections between a father and a son. And so to celebrate this morning, fathers who are doing the right thing, who are loving their families as they should, to celebrate those, we're going to see how the Father, our Father in heaven, relates to His Son, Jesus. We see the Father disclosing to the world unashamedly how much He loves and cares for and encourages His Son. Fathers, you know that your children have needs. Every child has needs. Every child has basic needs. And today we're going to talk about the dads who meet those needs. Every child has the needs. The good dads are the ones who meet those needs. We see that in the relationship between the Father in heaven and the Son that He sent to the earth. First of all, we see that a dad is present. A dad who's meeting the needs of his family, of his children. A dad is present with that family. That's what we read about in Matthew chapter 3, verse 16, where after Jesus is baptized, the Spirit of God descends like a dove on Him. Now, we understand that's the Spirit of God coming down, but the Spirit of God is the presence of God descending like a dove down on His Son, Jesus. And you know there's a need in our world today of fathers, of dads being present with their families. Right now, in our country, 45 million children under the age of 18 will go to bed tonight with no father present. 45 million children in a house will go to bed tonight with not a father present in their lives. We live in a culture in our country today where fathers a lot of times abandon their children. Today, we celebrate dads who don't do that. We see in Matthew chapter 3 that God did not abandon His Son. Now in John 3, yes, He sent Him down to the earth. And that sending Him down to the earth is eventually going to send Him to the cross because He loves the world so much. But God did not abandon His Son. And we, fathers, we can't abandon our children. There are lots of obstacles in life. That's just the way the world is. Lots of obstacles that can get in the way from a father being present with his children. In our world, the fact is, there's a decline in marriage. There is a rise in divorce. In our world, fathers sometimes struggle with addictions, or there are bad relationships with the mother of a child. And so the reasons are endless in our world. But the fact is still that 45 million kids tonight will go to bed and dad will not be around. As a father and as a dad, we don't have the luxury, we don't have the opportunity to wimp out on our kids. The Father in heaven was present with His Son. Fathers under heaven, dads in this world, we should be present with our kids as well. And so make an inward resolve right here and right now, Dad, that you're going to be present and available for your children. There might be barriers, there might be struggles, there might be roadblocks that keep you from being present with your kids, but don't let them stop you. Decide right here and right now that just as God the Father was present with His Son on the earth, we're going to be present with our kids today. That's step one. We celebrate dads today who are present with their children because being present opens up a door for what our kids really need. Second thing this morning, a father, a dad, acknowledges his children. Look at verse 17. This voice of God comes down from heaven, Matthew 3:17, and says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." This is my son. That's a story of a father who's acknowledging his kid. God the Father leaves no ambiguity about who this Jesus is to Him. He lets the world know. He lets His Son know, this is my Son. Just as God the Father acknowledges His Son on the earth, our kids need to hear that we acknowledge them. Our kids need to hear that we choose them, that we're proud that they are our children. The Jews have a ceremony for this. And I'm going to tell you about it real fast, but it's really interesting. It's called the Act of Redemption. And on a child's 31st day of life, when the kid's 31 days old, about a month old, they're going to take that kid to the rabbi. And they're going to have this whole ceremony. It had good origins. It's a little different now. But there's this whole ceremony where they come to the rabbi and they present this 31-day-old child to the rabbi, and the rabbi basically says, do you want to redeem your kid? Do you want to buy back your child? According to the Jews, firstborn always belongs to God. And so they will go to the rabbi with the firstborn, and the rabbi will say, do you want to redeem your child? The father will have a choice. He can say, yes, I want to redeem my child, or no, I want to dedicate him to God. If he wants to redeem the child, the father has to give 5 silver coins, which is about $60 in our money. It's not a whole lot of money. And so, do you want to redeem your son? Yes, I want to redeem my son. Then 5 silver coins. But here's what the Jews understand. The Jews understand that by that ceremony, that child at least knows that my dad chose me. By going through that ceremony, by growing up knowing in the back of your mind, my dad chose me, my dad wanted me, that instills something in that child. That shows that child that his father has at least acknowledged him. The Jews recognize that because this child can recognize that my father chose me and wants me and decided to redeem me, there are psychological benefits, there are emotional, mental benefits, there are spiritual benefits for that. Those things the Jews recognize. And I believe them. Our children need to be acknowledged. Our children, fathers, need to know that we choose them, that we're proud that they are in our lives. Our kids need that in their lives. Do you do it? And I've got to ask myself the same question. We probably acknowledge our kids mentally when I say, yep, that one's mine. That's my kid. We acknowledge our kids in our minds, but do they know that? Do they know? Do we let them know, I chose you? Do we let them know, I want you? Do we let them know by words or actions that I'm proud, I'm glad that you are a part of my life? Do we spend more time, dads, telling our kids how much trouble they cause us? Or do we spend more time telling them how happy we are that God chose us to be their dad? Do our kids know that we're glad that they are our kids? Do they know that we would choose them over any material thing in the world? Dads, your kids need you to acknowledge them. They need you to acknowledge their successes and also their failures and help them through those failures. They need you, they need us to acknowledge their victories and celebrate with them, and also to acknowledge their defeats and help them work through that process of pain or sadness. They need us to acknowledge the times, the things in their lives that bring them joy, and they need us to acknowledge the things in their lives that bring them sadness, and for us to come alongside and help them work through those things. Acknowledge your kids. Show your kids that they are important to you. Being present with them allows us to acknowledge them and to show them that they're important to us. But then there's a third and a final thing that we have in this story in Matthew chapter 3 about a father and a son. When he comes and this voice comes and he says, this is my son, he says, this is my beloved son. This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. We see in the story of Jesus and the story of God, we see God acknowledging and loving his son, affirming his son, both with words, this is my beloved son, I am well pleased in him, and with actions. Now, think about it. At this time, Jesus is probably about 30 years old. And we don't know a whole lot about the life of Jesus from the age of about 12 through the age of about 30. So there are about 18 years or so that we don't know a whole lot about. We imagine that he spent time in the synagogue or he went down to the temple. We like to think that he was growing, Luke 2:52, spiritually. He was growing more mature. He was growing emotionally. He was growing physically. He experienced growth. We don't know a whole lot about it. But probably at this point, in Matthew chapter 3, this is where the ministry of Jesus begins. And so at this point, it's pretty safe to say he hadn't preached a sermon yet. And looking back on Jesus, we love his messages. We love the Sermon on the Mount, but that hasn't happened yet. That's Matthew 5. We love the times where he'd pull somebody aside and he would just talk to them about salvation, or he had talked to them about God. We love those times. But in Matthew chapter 3, that hasn't happened yet. But we still see the Father saying, this is the Son that I love. This is the Son I am well pleased in. He hasn't done any of that stuff yet. But he's still loved. He's still affirmed by his Father. At this point, he hasn't healed anybody. And the crowds would grow to love Jesus because he healed their sick. And at times, he would raise their dead. He hasn't done any of that yet. That comes later in his life. At this time, he hasn't preached a sermon, hasn't healed anybody, hasn't raised anybody from the dead yet. He hadn't cast out any demons. Jesus hasn't created a following by any of this stuff yet. He's not done anything, really, that we look back on and say, that shows him to be the Son of God. He hasn't saved anybody yet. He hasn't created the church yet. All he's done is kind of been born, and he's grown up, and he's lived up until the age of 30, by all accounts, a pretty ordinary life. But God comes. Jesus is baptized, he comes up, the Spirit descends like a dove on him, and the voice of God comes from heaven, this is my Son, my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. God the Father loves his Son, not because of what he's done, not because of all the miracles that he's performed, not because of all the sick people he healed, the dead people he raised, the lessons that he preached. God the Father loves his Son before any of that. God the Father loves his Son because of who he is. It's his Son. God the Father loves his Son maybe because of what he's going to do, of the potential that he's got. And so, dads, do your kids know, do my kids know, do they know that we love them? Not just because of what they do. Not just because they're smart or just because they're athletic or just because they're good with people. Do our kids know that we love them just because they're our kids? Do they know that we love them just because God put them in our lives and gave us the blessing of being able to raise them? God's love is shown to Jesus the Son here in words. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And through his life, God would show his love to Jesus, his Son, in action. Those are the things, dads, that our children need. Do they know you love them? And I know in your mind you're saying, of course I love my kids. Do you tell them? And do you do more than tell them? Do you show them how much you love your kids? That's what they need. A father who is present with them, a father who affirms them, a father who acknowledges them, a father, a dad who loves them unconditionally, no matter what they do or don't do. A dad who loves them. Young guy, young adult, in Portland died this was a few years ago. Died in Portland, and from an early age, the guy had been caught up in gangs, had been caught up in a terrible kind of life, had really gotten mixed up with a lot of the wrong people, and that hard time ultimately led to this young adult guy's death. And so he dies, and at his funeral, the place is packed, and the typical things happen whenever a young person dies, a young adult person dies. They're talking about how he went too young. They're asking God why something like this would happen. Lots of tears are shed at this man's funeral. But then people are going to leave, and they're going to move on with their lives. That's typically, how it works. But at the funeral, this tall guy comes to the front. He's dressed in a suit, really a well-dressed guy, and he stands over the casket, and that's about all he does. He goes up to the front, this young guy's funeral, and he just basically stands there. And then he takes his tie off. He takes his tie off of his neck, and he puts his tie on this dead man. And he goes back to his seat. And the people in the crowd, they're reported as saying, well, that was kind of strange. We're used to seeing people go and spend long times at the casket, mourning over their lost loved one. But the guy took his tie off and put it in the casket. Went back to his seat. And it wasn't long before he got up out of his seat again. He goes back to the front of the auditorium. And this time when he's standing there, he takes off his watch. And he puts his watch in this man's casket on his wrist. And this time while he's standing there, he takes a chain from around his neck and he puts it on the neck of the guy who's dead in the casket there. And so a minister's there to do the funeral, and he's confused. He doesn't say anything during the time, but after the funeral's over, he's standing at the back, and people are walking out, and he grabs the dead young man's mother. And he said, what was going on up there? Why did that guy go and spend so much time? Why did he put all those things in the casket on the dead man's body? And the mother said that man was her son's father. But she said he hadn't been a father. That man was the biological father of my son, but he was not a dad to my son. She said he's been out of the boy's life for almost all of his life. And here's what the minister said. He said, that's when it hit me. He said, that man at that funeral, that was not just a father who is dealing with grief. That was a father who is dealing with guilt in addition to grief. In placing, he said, all those useless objects on his son's cold body, in essence, he said he was trying to fulfill in a pitiful way his fatherly duties. Sad to say, the minister said, he was too late. He said, the questions I ask myself are, why didn't he give his son a tie? And why didn't he teach his son to tie that tie when he was 9 or 10 years old? Why didn't he do what a dad does? The questions I have, he said, is why didn't he give his son a Mickey Mouse watch when he was a kid and teach him how to tell time? Why didn't he do what a dad does? The minister said, the question I've got is what kept this man from loving his son? Now, I'm not saying that because that father was absent, that's why the kid ended up in gangs, and that's why the kid couldn't get out of the gangs. I'm not saying that's why the kid died at such a young age. What I'm saying to us dads is think about that story. And let's ask ourselves a question. What's keeping us today from loving our kids? Fathers, what's keeping us today from being present with our families? What's keeping us today from giving our families what they deserve out of the father, out of the dad, out of the husband? And I want to challenge and urge you today to don't wait until it's too late to love your kids. That dad in Portland, that's exactly what he did. And so the only way he can process that guilt and that grief is to go and put a tie on his kid's dead body. The only way he can process that guilt is to go and put a watch and a necklace on the body of his son who died at an early age. I don't want that to be us. Don't wait until it's too late to love your children. Today we celebrate and we acknowledge fathers who are not waiting until it's too late. Today we acknowledge and celebrate fathers, dads who are doing it the right way, who are doing their best. And today I want to thank you, dads who are present. I want to thank you for being that father. And whether you're a father, a stepfather, something else, you're a dad to those kids. And I want to thank you for being present, for acknowledging them, for showing them that you love them. But I also want you, dads and moms and kids and whoever else, I want all of us today to acknowledge that no matter how good or bad our dad is, we still need a relationship with our Father in heaven. And so maybe you're here today and you're not a son or a daughter of God right now. Maybe you're here today and you've got broken relationships with your parents, with your dad, with your mom. Maybe today you've got all these broken relationships in your life, and maybe some of them stem from a broken relationship with the Father in heaven. And so maybe today you want to make that situation right. God sent His Son, right? We talked about John 3. God sent His Son so that whoever can come to Him will not perish, but have everlasting life. God sent His only begotten Son into the world so that we can all be sons and daughters of God. But that only happens in His Son, only happens in Christ. Today, if you want to be baptized into Christ, we'd love to make that happen. God will be your Father. Jesus, your brother. We'll all be your family. Maybe today you are a Christian. You're part of the family of God. But like sons and daughters sometimes do, maybe you've strayed and you've gone another way. You've gone your own way, and it's brought you distance between you and your Father in heaven. Maybe today you want to come back and want to make those situations right. Maybe there are some other things going on in your life today that you just want us as a church to pray with you about. This morning, if there's anything we can do to help you out, to strengthen your walk with your Father in heaven, please come. Please come make it known while this morning we stand and while we sing together.